Hello, everyone. Welcome to Module 1 for Teach 110. I thought I would start with the Canvas page. I know we had our session together, but I wanted to just recap a couple of things in case anyone missed it and just for reminders. So as you can see, this is the opening page. You can access the syllabus always, as you know. You can also directly access your discussions or assignments from this front page, but I'm going to pop us over into the modules. You'll see that this course is divided up into 4 different modules. And so if you already took a look at the syllabus, I'm going to jump over there now. You'll see that the first week of class, we cover chapters 1 through 4 in Module 1. And then Module 2, the second week of class, covers chapters 5 through 8. And the third module in week 3 covers chapters 9 through 12. So I know that's a lot of reading each week, but I'm hoping by getting this up early, you might be able to get in and work ahead a little bit with reading the materials in the textbook. So speaking of the textbook, the text for this class is Becoming a Multicultural Educator. So make sure that you purchase this book. You can buy this, which I know it's pricey, so I apologize. I do not normally teach this class, so I probably wouldn't have had quite such a pricey book. But you can get an online ebook that's slightly less expensive if that is an option you want to take, and you may be able to get it online used as well. So wanted to just quickly go through the table of contents for this text. So like I said, the first module covers the first 4 chapters in the book. And so providing an overview of what multicultural education is, some of the history behind this, and then thinking about what it means for you to be a multicultural educator. I don't know that I want to say becoming, because I think many of you probably already are, as you'll see as we work through the 4-step model in chapter 2. And then the next 2 chapters are in section 2 in the text, and they provide more historical perspectives and information about culturally responsive teaching. And so, as I shared, Module 2 covers chapters 5 through 8. Module 3 covers chapters 9 through 12. And then Module 4 is, there really aren't any additional readings, so that's kind of nice to be able to cover that. So within each of the modules, when we look at this, you'll see that there's information related to things that you should do ahead of time, an overview of the module, as well as the objectives covered within each modules, the learning materials. So in learning materials, the recorded video presentation is what I'm doing right now. So soon that will be up for Module 1. You'll see that there's a direct link to the textbook, as well as PowerPoint presentations for each of the chapters in the module. Those PowerPoint presentations are different than what I am going to be working through today. Today, what I'm providing is more of a quick overview from each chapter, where these PowerPoint presentations, I'm going to open one up real quick here. You'll see these have a bit more detailed information for you to access and follow along with. A note here, if you download these presentations, let me get here, you will also be able to see notes, the notes page. If you just do the quick access this way, you aren't able to see the notes page. So I wanted to make sure that you knew that ahead of time. All right, so I am going to Push us back over here. And just wanted to talk through a few things to just kind of lay the groundwork for the entire course. As you know, this course is very condensed. That's the word I'm looking for. We took a 16-week course and put it into 4 weeks. And so we cover a lot of information each week in each module. But I wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page regarding some things related to teaching in general, but specifically thinking about multicultural education. We are living in a very interesting time in our country where things are very polarized and certain words have a lot of weight that have been given to them. And so we will use a lot of the words that are in some cases seen as controversial. But I hope that through this course and through what you'll learn in this course, that just as we talk about in, I hope, every course at Illinois State, is that we really focus on the learner. We focus on the students that we have in front of us and letting that be our guide more than even administrators or certainly politicians or others. So I keep chatting here, and I wanted to get to these central principles. So I think from my perspective, some of the central things that I think are important for us to keep in mind as teachers in general is that, one, we as teachers have choices. While there may be some people out there who want to take power from teachers or limit choices that we have to make and the way that we teach and what we teach, at the end of the day, typically what happens in your classroom is largely up to you. All right, so that's a first principle that I want us to keep in mind. Next, I want us to think about teacher identity is central to effective instruction. So what that means is that who you are as a person, who you are as a teacher matters. And each one of us brings something different to our classrooms. We all have different lived experiences, and our identity makes a huge difference in the way that we teach, what we teach, how we teach. And then the last point here, this quote from another text that I've used in the past. It says, when we realize that we do have choices, we as humans, but especially as teachers, and when we articulate those choices explicitly, we have taken we take the first steps towards empowerment. This can be defined as collaborative creation of power. And so what I hope we are focusing on is how we can work to empower our students, empower families, even empower ourselves to make good decisions about what happens within our classroom, the relationships that we develop, what we teach, why we teach it, and how we teach it. So those are some things to keep in mind. I also want you to just keep these questions in mind as we move throughout the coursework. And these are just pretty big, broad questions that I think you should constantly be reflecting on as you move through your courses at ISU, and even once you're done with your courses and are out in the teaching field. So the first question is, what kind of teacher and or person do you want to be? the next question, what kind of people do you hope your students slash children will grow up to be? The third, what kinds of abilities and knowledge are accessible to students in our classrooms? And then finally, what kind of society do we hope that our students will create? So I know those are pretty big, heady questions, but I think keeping those things in mind, recognizing that we are teaching students who are several generations younger than us and will see the world very differently than we do, I think it's important for us to always have those things at the forefront of our thoughts as we reflect on our own teaching abilities. All right, so wanted to just quickly talk through each of the first 4 chapters in the textbook, which make up Module 1. The first chapter in the text is all about the history, theory, and evolution of multicultural education. And so in this chapter, we think about how much our nation has changed over time. First, I'll pause and say that for the most part, the textbook focuses on education in the United States. So again, that's good to have in context. We know that our classrooms are becoming more and more diverse. The demographics in our country are becoming more diverse. As I noted earlier, in some ways that's for some people that's being used as a way to sort of divide us. What I hope is that in this course we can see that there are also a lot of opportunities for us as teachers to think about bringing people from diverse backgrounds together rather than pulling people apart, how we can use this information to celebrate each other in our differences. And ultimately, I think it's important for us to keep in mind that multicultural education is important because it helps us to see that we have a responsibility, a commitment to serving and supporting the uniqueness within our students. And we can do that in a variety of different ways, but it means that we aren't going to teach every single student the same thing the same way. And so what that means is that we celebrate the difference and the uniqueness by being culturally responsive and responsible. And that means that we have to think about a variety of ways that we can teach and approach teaching, and likewise a variety of content, of curriculum, and what we teach. And ultimately, be committed to making sure that we are not always stagnant and stuck in our ways, that we are constantly evolving and growing and learning together as we learn and grow with our students. So, important things to keep in mind when we think about multicultural education in the United States. As much as so many of us would like to think that education is neutral and that schooling and education is not political, that is simply just not true. We, as a nation, have set up schools in a way that they cannot exist in isolation. The schools have to partner with people within the community, with families, with other businesses, with other service agencies and organizations. And so we cannot think about ABC Elementary School being a standalone unit. It's just not possible within the way that our schooling is structured in this country. Um, some people might argue with me that schooling is not neutral and that schooling is political, or would maybe like to think that the opposite is true. Um, but if we look at how schools are funded, if side note, if you don't know that, it's through property taxes in most places. Um, it's inherently tied to policy. It's inherently tied to political and economic structures that mean that some people have more and some people have less. Um, I would love to think eventually that our school funding formula might change so that it's not so much that way. But for now, that is the way it is in the United States. So when we think about the goals of multicultural education, and we look at this throughout the time that we're working through this course, we want to think about not just trying to make sure that everybody gets everything that's equal, to make sure that everybody, is happy. That's idealistic and would be lovely, but isn't really um, tackling some of the underlying issues that we have within our schools, within our education system in this country. So, really, what we want to think about is for all schools, for all educational entities, that we need to think about ways that we can create more equitable distributions within our schools to try to tackle inequality. We want to promote access to education, um, but we're going to talk a little bit about equity versus equality in a little bit and why we designate differences between, or we see differences between the two. We want to think about how we can raise the achievement of all of our students, not just the students who are really struggling, not just the students who are really excelling, not just students who are from low income or high income or any other way. We want to think about how we can promote equitable, high quality education for everybody across the board, knowing that all of our students are very unique and come to us with unique lived experiences, challenges, strengths, and so on. And then finally, we want to think about ways that we can provide students with opportunities to become more critical, creative, and productive members of society. And so, big asks with these three goals for multicultural education, but it's impossible for us to think we're only going to focus on teaching things like reading and writing and math and science and social studies without thinking about all the systems that are in place that impact how we teach that subject matter. So again, I know sometimes you'll hear people say, well, we want to make sure that there's equal access to opportunities for everyone. And equal education and equality means that everybody gets the same thing, right? And so when we think about education, do we want everybody to get education? Yes, absolutely. But to say that everybody is going to get the exact same thing doesn't really make sense, because not every student needs the exact same thing. And so equitable education is more about giving students what they need to be able to succeed and then ultimately achieve equality. So there's a couple of different little things down here below. When we think about equality, it's again, everybody gets the same thing. The ability to succeed is reduced for those who start with a disadvantage. We all know that none of us start at the exact same place with our schooling and education. Equality assumes that we do. Outcomes are different for everyone, And unfortunately, it means that if we give everybody the same thing, it's not necessarily what everybody needs. Versus equity is more about giving people the resources that they need to be successful, and recognizes that some students are going to need more because they start further behind or they start at a different place. Um, we work towards thinking about equitable outcomes for everyone. Um, I like to think about this as, you know, people who have specific learning needs, um, or just needs in general. So I don't know, quite a few of us probably wear glasses or contacts. So if we think about what we need to be able to see well, each of us has what's called a prescription, right? Unless you're the one of the lucky ones who has 20/20 vision. So you have a prescription that's unique to you that says this is exactly what you need in your glasses or contacts or whatever to be able to see perfectly. All right. So imagine if we threw those prescriptions out the window and just gave everybody the same prescription in their glasses. That really wouldn't serve, that might serve like 1% of the population, but everybody needs something a little bit different to be able to see well. So that's something to think about. If we give everybody the same pair of glasses, that's equality, or no glasses at all. Where equity is giving them, each person, the prescription in their glasses that they need to be able to see well. So those are things to keep in mind. And then this cartoon on the side, you may have seen this before. So you've got a bird, a monkey, a penguin, an elephant, a fish, a seal, and a dog. And the person sitting at the desk says, for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb the tree, right? And so we do this in education. We teach to the middle. We teach the same thing to everyone. We give the same tests and ask the same questions, assuming that everybody needs the same thing. But what we really need to do is think about what each of us needs and how we can help people to achieve their goals. When we think about multicultural education, some things that we hear, some phrases or words that we hear also might be things like not just equity, but also social justice. And when we think about social justice, it's really about making sure that all people are treated with fairness, dignity, respect, and generosity. It's not about shoving diversity down people's throats. It's not about forcing people to take action when they're not comfortable doing so. It's really about recognizing what each person needs and making sure that we're treating each person with the respect that they deserve. Something else that we hear a lot about is the achievement gap. And when we talk about the achievement gap, this typically refers to, again, like I said earlier, the fact that none of us have the exact same lived experiences. And in fact, some of us have started off in life with more advantages than others, right? And so the achievement gap refers to students who maybe started off life in a low income family, in culturally or linguistically are from culturally or linguistically marginalized groups. And it's this thought that students who come from low income families, who come from marginalized groups, are probably not going to succeed as well in school as others who come from higher income groups, who come from more the dominant culture, who speak the dominant language. And so, one of the issues with this phrase is that it's often seen as the people who are in the minority um, having less opportunities than people who are in the majority. And it sort of puts the onus on those people for taking responsibility for their own shortcomings when we often don't think about the fact that really a lot of times the achievement gap comes from unequal opportunities and unequal schooling, unequal housing. And so, for that reason, some people, Nieto and Bodie, have done a lot of research on this, and they always put the achievement gap in quotation marks because they want us to think about what that means and what it can mean for our students and their schooling. So I want to make sure I'm not missing anything else critical. I mean, please read through each of the chapters. Make sure that you are looking at the PowerPoint presentations online. Oh, I wanted to make sure to refer you to the self-assessment that's on page 37 in the textbook. I would encourage you to take that self-assessment now at the beginning of this course, and then I'm going to kind of hopefully respond or ask you to respond to that again at the end of this course so that we can see how you have grown as a multicultural educator. So in chapter 2, it's all about thinking of what we already do and ways that we can become even stronger as a multicultural educator. And so, largely in this chapter, it walks through these 4 steps to becoming a multicultural educator. And so, the first step is to make sure that we are developing an awareness, understanding that things like biases, prejudice, discrimination, racism really do exist, and that creates inequitable systems that means that some people can succeed, are more likely to succeed, and some people are less likely. So that first step is recognizing our own biases and acknowledging those biases. We're going to talk more about that in a little while. The next is that we need to have knowledge of other cultures, of other perspectives. The more that we reach out to learn more about others, especially our students and their families, the more that we are able to better understand them, to serve them, and to respond effectively with our teaching and their learning. The third step is to develop the skills required to teach students from diverse learning styles and cultures. And so this is really all about us understanding who we are, more information about the background of others, and then using all that information to educate ourselves in the best ways to teach our students. And then finally, the last part is to think about taking action, to sort of put all of those pieces together, to increase your knowledge, to develop the skills and dispositions that you need in order to create action and support the educational needs of all of your students. So chapter 2 kind of walks through each of those phases. And actually your discussion question for module 1 is related to that. So I will be looking forward to reading your module discussion posts related to that. Chapter 3 gets into section 2 of the book, which is all about knowledge. So when we think about the history of multicultural education, we can't think about this without thinking about the history of our nation. Um, and for better or worse, we as in the United States, we are a nation that is literally built on oppression and lies. And you might be thinking, geez, Dr. Q, that seems a bit dramatic. But what we know is that what we have learned in our textbooks, what we celebrate as part of our history and our national narrative is largely seen through the perspective of white men, for lack of just to say. What that means is that the way that we see history, the way that we traditionally teach history, the way that probably we learned history growing up, really downplays the contributions of women, of people of color, of people from marginalized groups. And so it's important for us to recognize that as a part of our history in order for us to think about how we can move forward to become more open to others and looking at diverse perspectives that may be different than our own. What I mean specifically in that first line about we are a nation built on oppression and lies is that much of our infrastructure within this country, the economic infrastructure, the literal like transportation infrastructure, building infrastructure, was built by slaves early in our nation's history. And so we would not have the economic system that we do. We would not have the infrastructure that we do in this country were it not for people literally working as slaves and not being paid, obviously, being, this idea that people could be possessions. And we've come a long way from there, obviously, but we can't ignore that this is part of our nation's history. The part about lies is that once slavery ended, many people were given, there were promises made to people who were former slaves about being able to own property, being able to vote, being able to have the same rights as other people. And that simply was not true. And so even when we think about things like westward expansion, all of those things were, people were kind of lied to about why they should go west. People were lied to about property that they could own and rights that they had. And so I'm not saying all these things to say that, this is a bad country or that we've done horrible things, which, there have been some bad things that have happened in our nation. But I think it's important for us to recognize that those are some of the foundational pieces that underlie who we are as a country. That said, I think it's also important for us to keep in mind that as human beings, every single person on this earth, all humans are 99.9% identical in their genetic makeup. Read that again. All human beings are 99.9% identical in their genetic makeup. So basically, that 0.1% is what makes each human being different. And so when we start to think about drawing lines and maps and separating people into who's good and who's not good and what race is better and all the different things, I want us to keep in mind this statistic. We are so much more alike then we are different. Okay, so I'm diving right into this here. So, wanted to talk a little bit about race and racism. So, as you probably know, race is a social construct, right? So, race, the color of our skin, that is something, the term race and recognizing differences based on the color of our skin um, is something that we as humans have come up with, right? Like we just read that 99.9% of our genetic makeup is the same. The color of our skin, gender, things like that, those are some of those parts of that 0.1%. And so when we think about um, race, that is a way somebody created this term to describe differences in physical appearance. All right. So it can also mean differences in our cultural history, our ethnic classifications, but racial categories um, are sort of like involved in and subsume ethnic groups. So then, what do we mean when we talk about racism? So, racism is really thinking about those social constructs of race. So, people who have different skin tone, different skin color, different backgrounds and cultural beliefs, and how we can separate those out to provide and to identify some groups as having more power and some as having less. So I'm just going to read this quote. This racism is the systemic subordination, so like putting people in order, of members of targeted racial groups who have relatively little social power in the United States. So traditionally, we think of marginalized groups as people who may be African American, Latino or Latina, Native Americans, Asian Americans. So, by the members of the racial group who have relatively more power, which traditionally is people who are Caucasian or white. This subordination, so assuming that some groups are in a lower social group than others, is supported by the actual actions of individuals' cultural norms and values, and the institutional structures and practices of society. So I would encourage you, when we think about race, it's never a matter of race or, it's always a matter of race and. You cannot take out race from our cultural history within this country. So, why don't we talk about it? We're going to watch a video. All right. So, I love so many things about that. One is that um, it can feel very uncomfortable to talk about race and racism. And so a lot of us tend to shy away from it. And I appreciate what she said about sometimes being afraid that you're going to say the wrong thing or that you'll be wrong. Um, but when we're working with children, it's always a good idea to answer questions, to be as honest as we can while also being respectful. Um, and part of our work with children is helping them to understand the ways that we are similar and the ways that we are different. And so, something else that I really like um, is thinking about what she talked about with, um, you know, not assuming that people don't want to be invited to the party, like don't ask me why I'm not invited, ask the host. And people in power. In this country, we still very much see um, if we look at the people in power, it's gotten more diverse-ish, but it's still largely white men, right? And I'm not saying anything against white men because there are plenty of amazing white men, but when we think about the um, who's invited to the table, right? So when we think about if we think about people sitting around a table at a party and we assume that the most popular people are going to have a seat at that table. The people who are always going to have a seat at the table, if we think about men or women, probably men, more dominant group. If we think about white or other races, probably white. If we think about upper income or lower income, probably upper income. So naturally, some people always have a seat at the table. We don't have to worry about inviting the upper income white man to the table because guess what? He's already at the table. Probably several of people like that are at the table. What we do need to think about is the people who aren't at the table, who've never been invited to the table, and question why that is and how we can bring them from those outside edges to be a part of the table because their voices need to be heard. So, when we think about racism and discrimination, um, this is something, when we think about that idea of somebody not having a seat at the table, um, that can happen for a whole host of different reasons. But often that happens because people in power actively do not want some people to have a seat at the table. And so, what that means is that some people never get asked to the party or to join at the table. And so, oops, this video, sorry, this video is all about the systemic racism that we sometimes see and discrimination within our schools and society. All right. Okay. So, um, keeping those things in mind, I think it's important for us to think about how race and racism has played a role in indiscrimination in the education systems in our country since our country was founded. And so I think it's, again, we can't ignore that some of our students come into our classrooms with a different set of, well, all of our students come into our classroom with a different set of lived experiences. And some of them have started in a different place than others. And so it's not, again, that we give them special treatment, but when we think about that equity in education, we think about what their needs are and how we can help them move forward alongside the students who started with more advantages from birth. So, thinking about race and racism in schools, this is not something that has gone away. I think about it even in my own community. Again, I mentioned earlier about property taxes in communities. And so basically, what that means is that children who live in wealthier, more high income neighborhoods where property taxes are higher, more money goes to the schools in those neighborhoods. And so those schools that are in the same district get higher rates of reimbursement and get more money basically than schools that are in lower income neighborhoods. And so even though we have officially desegregated schools, since Brown versus Board of Education in the 50s, segregation in schools is still alive and well in this country. And so now we're going to watch a video about that. All right. And I want to go back here. And so I don't share all of these things to make you feel bad about who you are or um, what happens within your schools, but it's also to help, but it's more to help you understand the context of schooling in this country and how we can be more supportive of our students. And so in chapter 3, I'm still in chapter 3, I think, we talk about different things that happen within classrooms and schools that lead to more opportunities for some children than others. So, if we think about policies within schools that exacerbate inequality, things like looking at suspension and expulsion rates, who gets suspended and expelled, what does that system look like within schools, within classrooms? And then also thinking about all of these different things that create differences, create inequity within schooling. So things like tracking. So tracking is basically grouping and making sure that like some students are going to be in a higher track than others. Who gets um, who gets retained, like has to repeat grades. What are issues with standardized testing? We're going to talk about that in another chapter, as well as curriculum. Pedagogy is like how we teach, what we teach, thinking about the disciplinary policies that we see within schools, the actual physical structure of schools and makeup and safety within some schools, and also thinking about some of the challenges with the limited role of student and teacher voice, and even family and community voice within our schooling structures. Chapter 4 is all about culturally responsive teaching. And I think, again, this is another one of those culturally responsive teaching has gotten kind of a bad rap. And I think that usually what people are referring to who are talking about culturally responsive teaching in a negative light are not really talking about what culturally responsive teaching really is. So this video kind of breaks down what culturally responsive teaching is and what it looks like in our schools.